So we'll get started. Hi, everybody. Good morning. Welcome to the Creating an Equitable Future for Our Organization webinar series. I'm Trista Harris. I'm a philanthropic futurist. You can connect with me on Twitter at Trista Harris or on LinkedIn at /Trista Harris. I've worked in nonprofits and foundations my whole career and really passionate about what happens in the sector. I've been doing futurism work for the last 12 years or so, and now I am the CEO of Future Good, which is a consulting firm that helps both foundations and nonprofits envision a better future and build some of the structures that we are talking about through this series into their work. For those of you that are new to this session, the tools that I'm sharing with you today are from my book, Future Good. I wrote the book because I want social sector leaders to have the tools that they need to build a better future. I'm giving the electronic copy of the book away for free during the pandemic. So if you go to my website, tristaharris.org, and you click on the little pop-up that shows up, you'll be able to get that free copy of the book, the download. It's also really important for you to think about who else in your organization needs to start thinking about how to build future thinking into your work. It is really hard to do this work by yourself. It's really about who the team is that you're building around your organization to do this. And so share those links with people within your organization that you think can help you push this change forward. So as you probably know, this is part of a 4-part webinar series. The first session was about creating your ideal future. The second session was about signals of the future. Our last session was about understanding your current reality and what things might make it really difficult to have that ideal future that you've laid out. And then this session is about how to get from here to there. So that current reality that you've laid out and some of those challenges, what does it take to move beyond that and get into that ideal future that you hope for? So all of these sessions, if you've missed some of the previous ones, are available on my blog at tristaharris.org. So you can see those previous sessions if you've missed it. I'm also offering a certificate for anybody that has completed all the sessions. So if you participated live or if you've gone back and you've watched those recordings of those videos, if you like that certificate, just send me an email at hello@tristaharris.com. Make sure the subject line is certificate, and then put your full name inside the email so that I know who to make that certificate out for. Today I've got Julia from my team is joining us today, and she's going to be managing the chat function and any questions that you have during the process. So feel free throughout the presentation to type those questions into chat, and Julia can make sure that I hear those questions. So this session is the getting from here to your ideal future. Just a little bit of review. We are using a tool called backcasting. So backcasting is when you decide what you want the future to look like, what is the best possible outcome, and then you work backwards and figure out what do I have to do to make that ideal future happen. In this method, you're not trying to predict the future, you are trying to create the future, which I think for the work that all of you do is especially important. The way that this process often works with my clients is that we're bringing together the right people to envision this ideal future: board, staff, engaged community members, participants in the program, community partners. Those are usually the right people to help you envision that ideal future. This is not work that you can do on your own. This is really about aligning all the right people to make sure that you're on the same page for what the vision looks like. So the first step of this process is the envisioning your ideal future. This is where you're asking the participants in your process to envision, what does it look like if everything is completely the way that we want it to look like? What if we built in all the systems to make an equitable organization? What's different within our organization and what's different within our community as a result of that? And we did that in our first session, so you can go back to the video from session 1 to see that. The second piece was signals of the future. So those are things that you have done in one program or one staff member is doing, or you've tried a couple times. that will directly lead you to that ideal future. This is about how you build confidence about what's already working in the present that will get you to the ideal future. The current reality is the things that you are doing right now that make it impossible to reach that ideal future. In the last session, we talked about how to build sort of positivity and confidence of the group that you're working with by doing the ideal future and signals of the future. And then in current reality, how to build some structures around that conversation where people don't feel overwhelmed and feel like it's impossible to get to where you're going. So our work today is about this jump from how to get to current reality to ideal future. Sometimes I talk about this as how do you get from the first curve to the second curve. This is really where the rubber meets the road. The challenge that organizations feel in these sort of planning processes is that you have all of the systems and processes of that first curve. So your organization is built for this first curve, but you have the pressure of the outcomes of this second curve. So the uncertainty is those two things running together. The other piece that I want to remind you of is in session 1, we talked about this model of the 4 roles of a foundation. This is also completely usable for nonprofits. You just change that funder role to a program provider role. And the work is really about how to build an equity lens across all 4 of these areas. It cannot just be on that external program or funding part. It really needs to be across all 4 of those areas. So just a reminder, the first funder or program provider area is about your external efforts. Community citizen is how you use your voice as an organization. Employer is what are the sort of staff that you need to make this work. And economic entity is how you both spend and invest money as an organization. And aligning efforts around each of those things is critically important. So how do we make sure that we are building the tools and structure that we need within our institutions to make that great work happen? So I'm going to give you some of the bright spots that I have noticed in some of my client organizations and some other nonprofit and foundation areas that have tried to do this jump from the first curve to the second curve. What are the things that you need to put in place to have the sort of systemic change that we've been looking for in this process? So in the Signals of the Future session, we talked a little bit about this amazing change from the Ford Foundation. They have taken out a social impact bond to get money at a lower interest rate than what they're making in their endowment, and to increase their grant making almost by double as a result of this loan that they've taken on. So for the next 2 years, they'll be able to almost double their grant making in this process. Darren Walker is the CEO of the Ford Foundation. And I think the interesting piece about this is it's a new way to do work, and we are living through a time of huge societal transformation and huge need in a million different areas. And if foundations and nonprofits don't completely rethink how we do our work, we're not going to be able to meet the need of this moment. And so I think this is a wonderful bright spot of what's possible when you completely think outside of the structure of the way that your field has always done this work. When I read the press release about this, I was like excited, yelling downstairs, and my family was like, what is going on? I was like, it's a social impact bond. Nobody's done that before. And so I think we need that sort of excitement coming from all our organizations. What is the thing that is so outside of the way that you've always done your work that can amplify your impact in this time where we really need to step it up like we haven't before? The next thing that I've seen a ton of is organizations implementing diverse vendor policies. I am a huge fan of doing this. It has a big ripple effect within your organization and within your local economy. When I was the president of the Minnesota Council on Foundation, we implemented a diverse vendor policy where the expectation was all staff that had spending authority were spending at least 15% of those dollars with people of color owned vendors. And it was, of course, a process to get there. You have to start with the place where you're laying expectations and letting people know that this is a bar that's important for them to hit, and then providing them with all of the support that they need to do it. So many states have databases that you can purchase that have lists of all of the people of color owned businesses in specific geographic areas. You can also start to create your own list. In your accounting systems, you can add checkboxes to keep track of which businesses are women owned or people of color owned or veteran owned, or whichever things are important to your mission as an organization. The other thing that I made sure that we did is our staff were evaluated on that spending. So when we sat down and did quarterly reviews and yearly reviews, I would have a printout of their spending so that I could say, so what's been easy, what's been hard, where do you need help? On the catering piece, because we were an organization that was consistently hosting people, we made sure that our vendors left business cards out so that all of our members that were coming to meetings could then hire the vendors. We made sure that we listed them in things like our annual report or a conference program so that we were giving more attention to those organizations. And what we heard from many of those vendors is that our members then started to hire them. And people of color owned businesses are much, much more likely to hire other people of color to work in those businesses. And so it starts to have this wonderful economic ripple effect. Local businesses also circulate that money much more in your local community. So if you are a foundation with a geographic focus, spend your dollars in that geographic area. Why are you buying your office supplies from Amazon or from some national company when you can find a local provider that can do that for you as well? We had a lot of concerns from staff in the front end of, is this going to be more expensive and how is the quality going to be and all of those sort of things. Some of that is racism that's sort of built into us, this idea that if we are working with people of color businesses, the quality is going to be worse. And we had to work through that as a team and say, so is your concern based on experience, or is it based on just this sort of idea that maybe it's not going to be as great? What we very quickly found out is that often prices were lower and quality was much, much better. And so we found as an organization that spending the time and energy identifying those new businesses had a wonderful ripple effect throughout the field. So as you're thinking about the process and which things to implement within your organization, a diverse vendor policy is a great place to start because it builds momentum for other efforts. Next is the power of networks. So the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, which has been supporting this webinar series, thank you Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, has also created a network of foundation staff who are leading DEI efforts that are focused on inside of their foundations. The thing that I found while facilitating this network over the last year and a half is that the best way to do this work is to find your network of support. Who is trying to do this? Who can be your co-conspirator as you're figuring this out, not just within your institution, but outside. So this network has shared a ton of information with each other, consultant recommendations, DEI job descriptions, holiday policies. Each of them is making the work easier by sharing the load. And it is difficult to do system change efforts within your institution, especially when it's around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so making sure that you have a network of people that you can reach out to when things are frustrating and when things are going well and you need somebody to celebrate a big win that you've gotten that nobody understands besides somebody else that's trying to move forward those same efforts, it's important to find your people. So I'd encourage each of you to think about who else is in your local community or nationally that is doing this type of work, and what have they learned in the process, and what can you learn from the places that they've sort of bumped their heads within their own organization. The next thing that I think is really important and has been a bright spot in the field is that this sort of visioning is a great way to align efforts. So the equitable vision process helps disparate processes that are happening within your organization align to a broader shared vision. And you can't get to that broader shared vision if you're unsure what success looks like. And so I really love starting with this visioning process as opposed to starting from here's where we are, what can we do to make sure that our staff is 5% more diverse, or what can we do to make sure that we have 3% more volunteers of color next year. I think you really need to start with what it looks like 10, 20 years down the line when you're fully successful, so that you're moving your efforts towards where you're trying to go as opposed to what you're trying to change about the current reality. So that is different for many organizations, and that sort of thinking is not how we often do our work. This is why I'm such a fan of the futurism work, because I think the way that we've done this work in the field for so long makes it difficult to get to that long-term future that we're hoping for. So we're going to have a breakout. I'm going to break you into small groups, and I want you to have a conversation with each other about what your next step is to move this work forward. So what will it take to make the future more equitable within your organization? What's the first step? Who are the people that you have to talk to? Who are people that can kind of partner with you in this work? It really takes a lot more people coordinating together to make this happen. And so talk with each other about what the first thing is that you're going to do to move this process forward. So you're about to get zoomed into your next space. I'm going to give you 15 minutes to talk with each other. So I'd really encourage you to strategize about what it would take and what the process would look like for this to happen for you. All right, here you go. Welcome back, welcome back. We'll give everybody just another couple seconds to come back from their breakout rooms. Perfect. Okay, so I would love for you to put in chat what your first action is going to be as you're starting to move this work forward. This could be setting a meeting with your CEO. It could be reaching out to somebody else in your team. It could be just scheduling the meeting for the team to come together to start to do this visioning, but add those thoughts into chat. The other thing that you can put into chat right now is questions that you have about this session or about this process overall. So Julia, I'm going to read some of the pieces that are coming into chat about people's first actions. And then Julia, you look out for questions that people have overall. So I'm seeing talk to executive director about diverse vendor policy, getting the white fragility session, white fragility series, connecting with other participants in this series to network with, build capacity. I need the emotional support for sure. Reach out to each other. You can see the names that are in chat, find each other on LinkedIn and those sort of places. If people want to share their email addresses in chat, you can do that as well, or other social media places that people can connect with you. Somebody said identify partners, research and contact 5 people to start with in this process. Somebody said it's really about broadening my network of senior level consultants of color who can join my existing diversity team. Most of the diversity exists within our more junior staff. That is a huge issue within organizations, and figuring out who those more senior leader people of color are that can join our organizations are really about relationship building and networking. It's also about building a pipeline of leadership within your organization. So what does it take to move from those more junior to more senior roles? Gauging interest amongst fellow consultants to build a consortium, great idea. Really, there are a ton of great consulting networks. And so reaching out to those networks and saying, who's trying to do this work? What can we learn from each other? I think makes us all smarter. Somebody else that's starting with my own department to establish a diverse range of vendors. I often tell people that you can be part of the forgiveness sisters or the permission sisters when you're trying to do organizational change. I really love being part of the forgiveness sisters, where you do the work in the places that you have influence and pretend that don't know that you shouldn't be doing organizational change on your own. But once you move the work forward, then you've created a path for other people. And I think that's really important. Reach out to personal network. I'm seeing some email addresses. So I would just encourage you to reach out to each other and reach out to others in the field that can help you continue this work. Holding each other accountable is really, really important. So now we're going to move on to general questions that you have about this process or the series or any of the pieces that have come up for you or what might be next for your organization. So Julie, I'm going to turn it over to you to let me know when you're seeing questions.
Sure. Let's start with this one. How do you move forward if your CEO isn't into this?
Yeah, that is a huge issue in organizations. I think a part of it is that sphere of influence part. So that example that we just read about, I'm going to start in my department, and then we're going to build those pieces in place. And if we can influence the rest of the organization, great. That's a wonderful way to get started if your supervisor or if your CEO is not actively supportive. I would say the other piece that's happening right now are times are different. So I talk to a lot of CEOs and senior leaders that have never been interested in this work before and are now like, we need to figure this out. What do I have to do to be the sort of leader that can lead during this time? And being really strong on racial equity is an important place for these leaders to start. So if you've tried these conversations before and it's felt like it's gone nowhere, I think it's a good time to start again. One of the tips that I've heard from one of my client organizations is they had a CEO that wasn't supportive of some of the organizational change efforts, and it felt like it was going to get squashed. And so they got that CEO an award for their work on this area, and the work continues now. So sometimes it is about figuring out what are those pain points and places of influence for your senior leaders, and helping to move them to the place where they're ready to do this work.
Great. So Trista, this question is, what is giving you hope right now when it comes to organizations being more equitable?
Yeah. I as I said, there is a lot of change that's happening in this moment. Organizations that have never been willing to do anything about diversity, equity, and inclusion are starting with the place where they're doing statements, but very quickly moving to the place that's about systemic change. I have never had so many organizations reach out for diverse vendor policies as I have in the last month, because organizations want to build really tactical pieces within their organization. They want to think about what their leadership pipeline is within their organization. They want to be able to recruit diverse staff. They're trying to figure out what's going on in their organizational culture that makes those things difficult. And they want to figure out what it looks like if they're actually successful. So I think people are ready in ways that they haven't been in the past, and that makes me super hopeful.
What do you recommend to access Ford Foundation's social impact bonds?
I haven't seen how they're going to give it out yet. I would say if you have an existing relationship with a program officer at the Ford Foundation, reach out there. If you don't, then I would say look on their website, see what their guidelines are. My expectation is that they're probably going to ramp up their current areas rather than building a whole new portfolio of work. It's just faster to get money out that way. So I'd check out their website for the most up-to-date information.
So yeah, Trista, someone on here does some consulting work for Ford and suggested that in their experience, you have to be a current grantee.
Okay.
So that's that question. And the next question is, how do you warm people up to free themselves of the guardrails to which we tend to default,
Yeah.
even when invited to dream long term?
Yeah, it is a skill to build. It's a muscle. And this is new for a lot of people. And we are in a crazy time of rapid transformation, where everything is different. And many of us are still stuck in our homes because there's a pandemic going on as well. And so sometimes that makes people curl into a shell and not want to think longer than what am I doing today. What I've noticed in this time is that people are really hungry to envision a different future because the present is pretty terrible. So this is an opportunity to give people space. And in previous sessions, we've talked about using icebreakers and staff conversations and that sort of thing to just get people talking about the future. If you are in a staff meeting and you guys are talking about a program, throw in, I wonder what this would look like in 15 years, and have a conversation about that so that people are building that muscle, and getting more comfortable. But it's hard because it's different and it's new. And I think that sort of vulnerability isn't encouraged in our organizations. And we need to do a lot more of that. So be those sparks within your own institutions to help start to move those conversations forward.
Right. There's one comment here. We're really rethinking our consulting work. We'll be focusing on relevance, social capital, and innovation, meaning rethinking organizational structures to support distributed leadership.
Yeah. I think we are moving towards a time of huge transformation in how nonprofits are structured and what our work looks like. And those that don't restructure, I don't think will exist. So we really have to shore up our work in different ways and have a clear view of where we're going. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to make it through all this volatility.
Our CEO wants us to move to be a more equitable organization, and so do many staff. But we have middle managers that have been a barrier. How do we move past this?
It is a huge problem. I hear often from boards that are like, we've told the staff to move this stuff forward. The CEO is ready to go. We have all these junior people of color staff members that are very excited, and yet nothing happens. Why is that? And it's because many organizations, especially larger ones, have a whole group of middle managers that determine do change efforts move forward or not. And what I have found in many organizations is that it is this group of staff that are sort of slowing down transformation because they've been through it a lot of times. And they know that often the organization isn't for real about it. So it's like, oh, I'll talk the talk, but I'm not really going to do anything differently. And so why would I upset the apple cart in this process? I remember being very early in my career, and I was with an organization, and I left for maternity leave, and we had been starting this diversity process, and we'd been broken into small groups. And so I went to my small group that had been meeting for 2 months or so, and they said, what should change in the organization? And I had a million post-it notes, and we should do this, and what about that? And everybody else's post-it note was like, everything's fine. And I was like, you guys don't think it's fine. I talked to you. And somebody tapped me and they said, oh, just so you know, this isn't a real process. Like, don't like waste your energy in this, because nothing is going to be different at the end of this. So I think to combat that, CEOs in particular need to put in place accountability measures for their middle managers. So what are you measuring them on? Are you measuring them on the percentage of diverse vendors? Are you measuring them on their ability to retain staff and retain staff of color? What are the pieces that are important within your organization, and how is that tied to promotion and salary? What are the diversity, equity, and inclusion goals that every single staff person has? And that when they are doing that yearly review, you're asking them, you said you were going to do these 2 trainings and you were going to implement these 3 changes within your department or unit. What happened? And if you are not seeing the progress on that, that needs to be tied to performance. And I've led organizations where there have been staff that have not been able to make that transition, and we've had to work together to find a better organization for them to work in, because those are the pieces that can completely stop organizational transformation. And what I've said to each of those leaders is, I understand that I am new, and when you were hired on, these were not the expectations. These are the expectations now. And so how do we get you to the place where you're ready to do this work? And how do we build the supports in that are necessary for you to do this well, but you are not allowed to sort of slow down the process because you're uncomfortable with it. You have to match the level of organizational change.
Great. So we have one question here, and another participant answered it, and maybe you can add on to that. So the question is, when you find that moving requires healing, how
Yeah,
do you begin that work when uncomfortable truths come up?
yeah,
Any insight welcome? And then the response was, we did a workshop yesterday on managing bias, modeling some healing work as part of that, starting with breathing, thinking openly, making social contract agreements.
that's fantastic. Um, this is a time where we all need a lot of healing, and a number of clients are bringing in sort of trauma informed training for both the clients that they're working with in community, because community is really traumatized at this moment, but also for their staff. I was talking to a friend that works in philanthropy that said, Black people that work in foundations need like a Black sabbatical for all of the extra work that they have been doing during this time to help sort of manage their organization through this transformation. And often staff of color in our organizations are asked to lead this sort of work when it is not a core part of their responsibilities, but it's a part of their identity. And that is an even more difficult thing to take on. And so I think it's important that we support staff as they are leading these sort of efforts. And I also think it's important, when you think about birds that are flying south, they take turns who's leading, and the person that's in the front, it is the hardest, and you're getting worn out in that process. And then somebody jumps in and takes that lead, and then that person goes back to support. And so as you're considering what your work looks like inside of your institutions, think about who those other partners are to move that work forward, and when do you lead and when do you follow, because it is a quick way to burn out, especially if you are a person of color in the field, to consistently be the voice that is leading these efforts and not having that support and not having other people jump in and lead at different times. So make sure that you're taking care of yourself as you do this as well.
Great. Someone loves the migration example. Um, Another question, how have other organizations started this sort of visioning?
Yeah. I think it is about picking the small group. So who are the 4 or 5 other people or 2 or 3 other people in your organization that can help you think about what this looks like and help you think about strategy. You have to make a decision about if you're leading it internally or if you're going to bring on an outside facilitator and what that facilitator's process is for moving organization through change. Will that facilitator be able to help you live in that visioning place as opposed to that more tactical place where strategic planning and strategic visioning often happens? And then I would just go back to that earlier point. If um, you have influence in one specific department, start there. That is the place where you're going to get traction and people are going to notice, and then those efforts start to move forward. Julia, we've got time for just one more question, I think.
Okay, great. Just want to make sure people see that there's a couple of people who are partnering and inviting others to join them. And then the last question is, what is the difference in strategic planning and strategic visioning?
Yeah, I think so. Strategic visioning can be part of a strategic planning process. After you do all of this visioning work, you can do that traditional business planning and yearly plan and dashboard and all of those things that happen in a strategic planning process. I think the difference is in many strategic planning processes, the point of view is from starting from where we are in this very moment. And so there'll be interviews of key informants and the questions are about the past or it's about right now. This process really starts with the future and then you create the steps to get there. So it sits in that same vein of work. The other thing that I often do differently when I'm doing strategic visioning, that is the purpose of it is strategic planning, is at the end of it, we don't create a 5-year plan or a 3-year plan or even a 2-year plan. Often I am creating a 1-year plan with a process for every year for re-envisioning what your next level of work needs to be based on what's happening right at this moment. I think many of you have been part of processes where you develop this very fancy strategic plan and then the whole world changes and then for the next 4 years the plan is irrelevant. So you need to have a plan that's sort of flexible, that every single year you're going from what you've learned at this very moment, what things move really fast and are great and which things were a little bit slower. So just to close up, I just want to reiterate that we are in a movement moment with really, really rapid change. Organizations that don't have a long-term vision about where they are going will close down or won't be relevant to the work that's important. And this isn't always just the bad news about not being clear and you can't get funding and all of those sort of things. Sometimes some of you have probably seen what's been happening with the Minnesota Freedom Fund, which is a fund to eliminate cash bail based in Minnesota. They're a very teeny nonprofit organization that's raised $35 million in the last couple of weeks. And that organization didn't have a vision for what do we do if suddenly we raise a ton of money. And so I think it's important for organizations to have a vision, not just for what if our big grant gets cut, but what if suddenly an additional $1 million or $10 million or $20 million is invested into your mission? What are the things that you would do in the short term and in the long term with those dollars? Because those sort of visions are the things that attract resources to your organizations because donors get excited about those big visions and they want to support it. But also when your organization is in a place of rapid change, you have the tools in place and the visioning in place to figure out what you're actually going to do. So the Minnesota Freedom Fund right now is doing that visioning process to figure out what are we going to do in this moment when we've got a ton of attention and a ton of dollars. What do we have to do differently? But it works even better if you've done it before. There's a a quote, the best time to plant a tree was 100 years ago and the second best time is today. And I think for many of our organizations, we need to start doing that long-term planning. Otherwise, we're not going to be ready when that transformation happens. So you guys have my contact information. You can always reach out to me through the website. There's a bunch of different places to connect. If you want to set up a call to talk through what this process might look like in your organization, I do free informational calls with people. You just set up an appointment in the consulting section of my website. I think it's wonderful that all of you have taken this time to really envision what a more equitable future looks like for your organization. I think it's what the sector desperately needs in this moment. And so please be encouraged and keep moving this change forward. You have the email address to send out. If you'd like to get that certificate, please send that email in to me and stay in touch. It was wonderful to connect with all of you. Have a great day.